All right, welcome to the first episode of Incoherent Thoughts here on Elections Daily. I'm your host, Dylan Brown, and joining me is Joe Sanberg, the co-founder of Aspiration Bank, the founder of Golden State Opportunity, and a collaborator of mine. Joe, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. So we're going to discuss a few topics. First off, we're going to talk about the ballot initiative that you were pushing for in California to raise the minimum wage to $18 an hour. We we know there had been some legal battle over getting it on the 2022 ballot, but can you just walk us through it?
Yeah, well, we sponsored the Living Wage Act in California, which would raise California's minimum wage to $18. We collected over 1 million signatures of Californians who want to put it on the 2022 ballot, and over 73% of Californians support voting for an $18 minimum wage increase in this election. There were some confusing communications that went from the Secretary of State's office to different county registrars who are charged with qualifying the signatures. And in particular, there was a letter that said that July 13th was the deadline to qualify our signatures, even though the deadline was actually June 30th. As a consequence, some counties submitted their signature qualifications late. They were genuinely confused. And to ensure that the will of the people was heard, we sued in court to get the state to put this on the 22 ballot. We even got a county registrar in San Mateo to sign a sworn declaration under penalty of perjury that he thought the deadline was July 13th based on the Secretary of State's communications. Unfortunately, the judge that heard our case was a Trump nominee judge and ruled against us in an ideological decision. Evidence being that when the proponents of recalling Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom wanted 4 extra months for their signature collecting, this same judge granted them that. And this judge wouldn't even grant us 7 extra days to raise the minimum wage. So we've been trying to appeal to the Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom, who has the power through a special election to put a ballot proposition that's already qualified for a future election. We've been qualified for the 2024 election onto a sooner ballot. So the California Constitution gives the governor the power to take our proposition, which would be voted on in 2024, and put it on the 2022 ballot. So far, our Democratic governor has refused to do that. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating because all of those who refuse to help us put this on the 22 ballot are saying to 5 million workers, many of whom are single moms like my mom who raised me by herself, that they have to wait 2 years for a raise. And let's be really clear about how much of a raise we're talking about. Raising California's minimum wage to $18 would mean $6,240 a year of extra pay for 5 million people. That's what's at stake here. And it's just unconscionable to me that any elected official could look at those 5 million people and tell them you have to wait 2 years. But so far, that's what we're encountering.
So it was largely a clerical error that on the part of the election officials that caused this issue.
That's
Is that
right. Entirely a clerical error.
that
People in the Secretary of State's office mean well. There was nothing nefarious,
of course.
but they sent a letter to some counties that unintentionally led those counties to believe that they had until July 13th to qualify our signatures, and then learned that it was actually June 30th. And so they submitted all of our qualified signatures on July 7th. We actually reached full constitutional qualification on July 7th because these counties thought they were qualifying us for 2022, and they thought they were submitting their signatures 6 days early.
So it's not even, it wasn't even that you didn't have the signatures the by the 2022 deadline when you thought you had more time. You did have the signatures by the 2022 deadline. It was completely a county mistake then?
We did have the signatures. We collected over 1 million signatures. You need approximately 650,000. It
Hmm.
was some combination of mistakes by the Secretary of State um, and counties, all honest mistakes, but mistakes
Of
nonetheless.
course.
And what's so frustrating is, why are we prioritizing process over fighting poverty? We have checks and balances in our system precisely so that we don't lose sight of the plot. The plot here is Californians want to raise the minimum wage to $18. That is the will of Californians. It's demonstrated in over 1 million Californians signing the petition to put this on the 22 ballot. It's demonstrated in the 73% of Californians who say they want to vote yes on an $18 minimum wage. It's demonstrated in the will of elected county registrars who are counting our signatures to qualify it for 2022. And how we could possibly let honest misunderstandings about a deadline stand in the way of a $6,240 annual raise for 5 million people. It doesn't make any sense to me. And it's exactly why people hate politics.
Right. So I have a lot of experience with clerical errors committed by the government causing issues. So I I don't know the ins and outs, but I 100% believe what you're saying because it sounds exactly like government to me. And it's not their fault. It's not the workers' fault. They're overworked and underpaid just like anybody else.
That's right.
So no ill will towards them, but this is just how it is. Um, so, what do you think is the rationale behind Gavin Newsom not calling for the special election? Um, yeah, what do you think is the rationale?
You know, I'm not smart enough to know what people's rationales are. Only God knows what's in our heart. I
Of
can only
course.
judge people's actions. So if Gavin Newsom is committed to making California a place where everyone who works can afford life's basic needs, then he'll use his executive authority to put this on the ballot, and he'll be a hero to 5 million workers. And if he doesn't, he'll be telling those 5 million workers, many of whom are single moms, that they need to wait 2 years for a raise. How he views this issue will be illustrated by the choices he makes, not by whatever his rationales may or may not be. Ultimately, in politics and in life, we can't ever know what motivates people. We can only know what their actions are. And we
Uh,
need elected officials who are going to act in accordance with the interests of working people. And if those politicians won't, then we need to find new ones who will.
so, what? I I don't know the process. Is there a deadline for Gavin Newsom to call this before the election? What basically beyond just Gavin Newsom declaring it, what should people be on the lookout for? And
Well, the
yeah,
window to call a special election is narrow because we'd want that special election to be consolidated into the general election ballot that's already being mailed to voters, because that would mean it would be of negligible incremental cost. We just leverage the existing ballots that are being printed and mailed to all California voters. So it's really a narrow window of only another week or so. And if Gavin doesn't side with workers in this case, then we're going to work through the legislature in 2023 to pass this into law. This is going to become law. California's minimum wage is going up to $18 because at the latest, this is already qualified for the 2024 ballot. So if we do nothing, the status quo is this will be on the 2024 ballot. Now the question is, how do we make it become law sooner than that? The soonest being 22, and something in the middle would be passing it through the legislature in 2023.
how viable is that? Because I know passing progressive policies through the California state legislature has been, let's say, a challenge in the past. Is that something you've already begun working on?
Yeah, I'm actually quite optimistic about it. I think we have wide and deep support in the legislature. This is supported by 73% of Californians. So it's certainly aligned with progressive values, but
Hmm.
it's not an issue that is only supported by progressives. California is a blue state, of course, but it's not 73% blue. When you have 73% of Californians supporting an issue, that means you have, a majority of independents and a significant number of Republicans who are on board with it, which is the case here. And it makes sense because it aligns with a value that I think transcends typical ideologies, which is work should pay.
Yeah, that is a conservative principle as well. That is a principle of conservative ideology, not necessarily of modern conservative politicians. But
Correct, correct.
I mean, w- the minimum wage, um, the fight for 15 started when 15 would have been an appropriate amount or close to an appropriate amount. But now, especially with inflation going up, I mean, people need money desperately. Um, uh, I would imagine that even Republicans and conservatives in California can see that they're hurting and can understand that, yeah, more money would help. It's obvious.
Well, it certainly shows up in the polling.
Hmm.
That's why 73% of Californians support it. Is a significant number of Republicans and a majority of independent voters understand that when you raise the minimum wage, first of all, you honor work, and second of all, you put more money into the economy because when workers have more money to spend, that means businesses have more customers buying their goods and services.
Right. We've seen that the minimum wage drives inflation argument isn't necessarily true. It certainly isn't always true.
It's totally baloney,
Yeah.
is actually the case. I have a message on social media that's taken off that shows the difference in the cost of Big Macs in New Hampshire and Washington. And Washington State has twice the minimum wage as New Hampshire, and Big Macs cost just about the same price. So this kind of boogeyman idea of, oh, you're going to crazy priced hamburgers is just a lie. It's a lie that lobbyists tell. Um, just not true.
Yeah. Um, so you're looking at passing it through the legislature in 2023. Is there anything people can do if they want to support that, if they're in California, if they're not?
Yeah, definitely. Go to California CA Living Wage Act.com, CA and sign up. And we'll be organizing our supporters to advocate to elected officials that will need to support this in the legislature.
All right. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, beyond this is something actually that's happening in my state of New Jersey. Um, and something that I've heard is also happening in a similar vein in California that I think is actually also encouraging news. Something I've been advocating for is universal healthcare, obviously, but universal healthcare, especially for the disabled, uh,
Yes.
because private healthcare doesn't have a mechanism for us. They don't. Uh, this might sound cruel, but I think it's the truth. Uh, Private healthcare expects the disabled to die quickly because their healthcare plans for us tend to tend to be the same as for seniors in assisted living facilities, and those cap at 7 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and the only thing I've found that would even begin to help is public waiver programs at the state
Mm-hmm.
level, and those depend on Medicaid. Uh, and Medicaid eligibility is a difficult thing to get, and much more difficult thing to keep.
Mm,
I, I've I've often thought that it's a full-time job to understand to understand this process and to keep my benefits, because there's no there's no mechanism to know what your benefits are, really.
mm,
Um, all of my benefits come from my own research,
mm,
which is a whole separate problem. But then the rules for maintaining eligibility are frankly ridiculous and cruel, but also unknowable sometimes.
mm,
Just like your clerical error, um, I was given faulty eligibility information,
mm,
um, which, as I'm sure you you and the listeners can understand, that's a problem when you're basing your entire process on eligibility requirements that aren't true. Um, and even if they were, Social Security eligibility has not gone up with inflation. The maximum you are allowed to make is $1,300 a month.
mm.
Maximum.
Terrible.
Yeah, can anyone live on $1,300 a month anywhere?
Absolutely
Um,
not.
and for every dollar below that, you're losing money off of your Social Security.
Mm,
So you are penalized for working, you're penalized for making money, you're penalized for saving money. You're not allowed to save under Social Security, you're not allowed to save more than $2,000
mm,
at any one time.
mm,
That's absurd to me. And um, luckily in New Jersey, there's another program called Workability that has much looser eligibility requirements. And
mm,
recently, um, a bipartisan bill was signed to eliminate the income cap and to eliminate the spousal penalty, um, which, if anyone is unaware, is uh, an eligibility requirement that says if you get married, your spouse's benefits or your spouse's income and assets, whether disabled or not, become yours and are used against you for eligibility. Um, so disincentivizing marriage and disincentivizing work. But good news on that front. At least the eligibility requirements are being loosened. And the same in California, except the asset cap was raised. It was almost doubled. Um, these are both, I think, obviously good um, measures. As with the minimum wage, putting money in workers' hands is always a good thing. Workers spend more than they save, so they're going to put it back into the economy.
absolutely.
Um, I, I guess I was more wondering, in your opinion at least, what what would be your not ideal system, but what would be your so not solution doesn't quite feel like the right word, but what would be your not solution, for lack of a better term? How would you handle the issue of disability if you had a magic wand, I suppose?
I think there's three principles. First of all, there should be no different minimum wage for people who are disabled.
Correct.
As some listeners may know and others may not know, in many states um, there is a different minimum wage for those who are disabled, and that's totally immoral and nonsensical. Um,
Hmm.
Second of all, we should have universal health care for all, period, which would take care of this issue
Yes.
across the board. And then third is we need to expand and deepen the legal protections that ensure that people with disabilities aren't prejudiced against in any way in society.
Yes. As people might know, they're because of oh God, I'm forgetting her name, Britney Spears, I believe. Conservatorships are often used against disabled people to basically take away the few limited rights we actually have.
Yes.
And the subminimum wage for the disabled has always been, in a perverse way, almost funny to me because it was done under the guise of inclusion and being kind to the disabled, um, which has always uh, it's always struck me as perversely funny that you think you're helping me by paying me less for the same amount of work. Goodwill is actually, if I recall, one of the worst for this, paying
Mm.
in some
Is that
cases
right?
$1 an hour
Wow.
to the disabled, um, which I don't. I want to believe that these things were done in the past out of um, misguided kindness because there was for a long time a bipartisan consensus on disability rights. The ADA was introduced by a Republican administration.
Right.
Um, or not a Republican administration. Bob Dole, a Republican senator, led the charge on the ADA.
Right.
That has eroded in my lifetime. Um, and the last senator who I think would be open to that, Rob Portman, is retiring.
Mm.
Rob Portman introduced a bill with Sherrod Brown to increase Social Security thresholds. There was a push to put it in reconciliation, but, well, almost nothing got put in reconciliation. Um, but I've never quite understood the subminimum wage. Um, the legal protections are really important. Disability lawyers need to be something that the at the very least that the government um, allows people to or gives people access to. But honestly, it should be provided for government benefits.
Right.
You should have your own advocate because this system is so convoluted. And in a lot of cases, I think uh, it was deliberately made complicated. Um, the government doesn't want people to continuously claim benefits, and the disabled aren't generally going to get less disabled. So they're always going to be we're always going to be claiming benefits. I am always going to need healthcare. That will not change. um, and it's always we talk a lot about pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps
Mm.
as a country, um, but I for the disabled, the bootstraps have been cut, uh,
Yes.
and maybe that was out of kindness, out of misplaced kindness, but we need to acknowledge this fact.
Yes.
And I hope we're headed in that direction. Um, the public health emergency has actually done something that I'm going to be writing about this as well, but I think the public health emergency has actually provided a great window into how universal healthcare can be actually quite easily achieved.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
because the government just gave the states money to not kick people off of Medicaid.
Mm-hmm.
We can do that. We can do that everywhere. We don't
Mm.
have to stop. Um, I don't know. Do you think there's any real mobilization to get us to a place where those because the pandemic's not going to end for us anytime soon. Um, do you, do you see those benefits as being at risk, or do you think
I think it depends on who controls Congress,
yes?
realistically speaking.
Yes. Unfortunately, I tend to agree. Although, even still, we have a Democratic Party that seems to want to forget we're in a pandemic.
Yeah.
Um, maybe because it's politically expedient, but maybe because they're just tired of it.
I think
Um,
it's a combination because I
yeah,
think there's people on all parts of the spectrum who are tired of it.
And I understand that. I'm tired of it, but that doesn't change what it is.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. What do you think? What do you think is coming down the pike? What do you think we can realistically hope for? Um, just in general.
I think it just so much depends on what happens in these congressional elections. I think if Democrats lose Congress, then unfortunately we could backslide.
Are you feeling optimistic on that?
No, I'm very pessimistic. I think we're going to get clobbered in the House elections. I think it's possible that we could gain a seat or two in the Senate because the Senate elections are more idiosyncratic to the personalities of individual nominees,
Mhm.
and Republicans have some really crappy nominees. But I think we're going to get
Yes, they
clobbered in
do.
the House.
Um, and what do you think we should be talking about right now that we maybe aren't?
I think that there are two factors uh, which should drive the midterms. One is um, how Republicans are going to take away so many rights of so many Americans. And two, we should trumpet more effectively the accomplishments of the Biden presidency.
And what accomplishments specifically would you want to highlight?
I think the Rescue Act that he passed and signed into law early in the presidency created a significant boost to the economy, and I think we're coming out of this soft patch where inflation is now abating, and I'm pretty bullish on the economy for the second half of the year, and I hope that we're going to pass the Inflation Reduction Act, which would be the biggest piece of climate legislation ever. It's really important that Congress passes that and the president signs it into law because that'll be a major accomplishment that he can run on.
Yeah, we really don't talk about climate change enough. Even though it seems like sometimes it's all we talk about on the left, it still doesn't feel like we do it enough.
Yeah.
Um, uh, yeah. Um, Joe, do you have anything else you want to
No,
discuss?
it's good for
Um,
now. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. So, bit of a shorter episode today. We will next week. I'll be here again doing popcorn politics. It'll be pre-recorded, um, and we'll be looking at Star Trek: Deep Space Nine, and how the Ferengi represent the writer's views on capitalism throughout the series. I hope you'll tune in for that. It's, I think, going to be a really interesting series in general. So uh, I stay tuned.
Good talking with you.
Good talking to you. Oh, I'm sorry. Joe, where can I'm so used to having this app have Twitter in your subheading, but where can people follow you and everything you're doing?
Follow me on Twitter at Joseph N. Sanberg.
And if you're listening on the podcast feeds, you can follow me at Dylan W. Brown 1. Thank you all for listening.
Thanks.